Hello guys, and welcome back to Joe's Ventures. And today we're doing part 140 of our Planet Zoo mod spotlights, where we take a look at some of the wonderful mods people are making, easy to talk about some of the wonderful biodiversity that we share our world with. So today we've got a very interesting amount of slugs today. So we've got Nawala's Exhibit Slug Pack that we're going to be taking a look through. There are 4 different species of slugs that I've each put through here, and we'll go over that. And then I've got a couple ungulates. I know everyone loves their ungulates. So we've got some really cool ungulates and herbivores going on, especially big mammals. So let's get stuck into it. So I'm going to be starting off today with the Pacific Blue Slug. So this is a relative of the South Pacific Blue Slug done by Leaf. So this one is the more common species. So this is Alcum Arthrorex Aerolimax columbius. So this is the most common species. So in terms of these guys, types of slugs, they're actually the second largest slug in the world, second only to like the ash gray slug that's from Europe. So these are the second biggest in the world. So they get the name banana slug because of their bright banana coloring. And the Pacific banana slug is the most common one found. So it's typically found around the United States from Alaska, California, Idaho, Oregon, Washington, and then Canada, British Columbia. So pretty much about the Pacific coast of the US, which is pretty cool. And as I mentioned, is the second largest out of all the slugs. So they typically get to like, this color, but also have like black blotches and spots. And they get to about between 185 to 260 millimeters. So quite a big animal. So in terms of the description, they are often bright yellow, which gives their name, but they can also be greenish, brown, tan, or white in color. And the species you can see, sometimes these spots can be so extensive they can almost cover the whole thing black. And as I mentioned, they're the largest species of, second largest species there is. So Pacific Blue Slug gets about 25 centimeters long, or up to 9.8 inches, and weighs about 515 grams, or about 4 ounces. Which is interesting, and they have a lifespan of about 1 to 7 years. So these guys, like other types of slugs and snails and even octopus and mollusks, they have a radula, which is like a tongue with lots of little sharp teeth that they use to grind up things. They're microscopic. They have 2 pairs of tentacles to sense the environment. They've got these 2 taller ones that are like eyes. These smaller ones detect pheromones. They have a single lung called that they open externally through a peristome, where they kind of actually rely a lot on dehydration is a big issue for these guys, so they have like a moist coating or mucus that they produce of themselves to help them breathe, which is really important for them. So typically it protects them from soil and leaves, but also keeps them moist, and they're typically most active at night. It can be active on cool, moist days because they don't dry out. They are simultaneous hermaphrodites. They both have sperm and eggs, and they reproduce by exchanging sperm with their mates. And then they'll produce about 75 translucent eggs, and these slugs will then mate and then lay the eggs throughout the year. They don't provide any further care as the eggs are abandoned as soon as they're laid. So this species here is native to the forest floors of North America's Pacific coast forests, so from like redwood forest and Douglas firs, from southeastern Alaska to Santa Cruz in California, with a couple of disjointed populations, and species suggests that this is actually a relic from the Pleistocene. So these guys may be much more common in the Pleistocene, but a lot of places they have much more smaller ranges with different species as well. So very similar to most other species of slugs and snails, they are detritivores or decomposers, so they'll eat animal droppings, dead leaves, dead plant matter, and things like that, and produce in the soil, and often do have a preference for mushrooms. And they're quite important as well. They become agents for seed dispersal, so they'll spread seeds and spores and excrete them in nitrogen-rich fertilizer that allows them to breed, and a great big contributor to the nitrogen cycle. Also, as well, they are quite common prey for things like raccoons, garter snakes, ducks, geese, and salamanders that'll eat them. And also juveniles can be eaten by moles and shrews, so they're quite important to the ecosystem. But they do have a way of defending themselves. So the mucus contains chemicals that numb them at the tongues of predators, and the mucus can absorb it 100 times its volume in water. So typically, it actually resembles human mucus a lot, but these guys actually have a protein that allows pretty much numbs anything that's on them. So like if you went to like touch it and lick it, or a raccoon did, it would numb their tongue. So it's not too bad for you, but it's like there's a way to get away. But the slime also is a protective barrier against pathogens, things like that, and it allows it to send cues to other species, other banana slugs to be like, hey, I'm ready to mate, things like that, which is quite cool. and also can carry mites and parasite organisms, which is not good. But anyway, so they're hermaphrodites, so they produce both. They have both male and female reproductive organs, and they can either have, by either even fertilize themselves sometimes, but they do have mating rituals where they will secrete pheromones and kind of leave trails for mates to follow. And the courtship can be quite robust, and during the mating they'll have a dance-like action and like lunge and nip and tail whip at each other as well. So it's really interesting. And copulation, sometimes copulation, the chewing can take up to 45 minutes. And after mating, the slugs will separate and seek a little location. So the impregnated slug will lay between 3 to 50 eggs in a small crevice, and they'll hatch after a month or two, and the young slugs will mature over several months. And the offspring are typically quite pale with a white hue as they grow to get used to the, accumulate to the distinct yellow colours. And they are quite a popular thing in culture, so they'll be used as food as well. And there's festivals that have slug races, but also the banana slug, which is the common banana slug on campuses like the University of California, Santa Cruz. They are common in local forests, and it's kind of like a way that they represent themselves, which is quite cool. Nice to see people appreciating these little guys. I love little slugs. So really, really cool little slugs here. Definitely a big fan. So, we're moving on. We're going to have a look at the leopard slug. So, another really cool slug. This is the leopard slug. I'll have a look at you here. Let's see if we can find one in a slightly better position to talk about. Oh, here we are. Perfect. So, this is the banana slug. Not banana slug. The great grey slug or leopard slug. They're a species of slug and are among the largest of the keeled back slugs, so another big one. So their external body length is about 10 to 20 centimeters, about 4 to 8 inches, and the greater part of their body is round, but they have a short keel on their tail. Their body is kind of streaked with like a pale grey, but they have stripes of spotted pattern where they get the name leopard slug. The shield is always black spotted as well, and the foot is also like a uniform ash color as well. They have very short, very long and slender tentacles as well, and the reproductive paw is actually right at the base of the right upper tentacle. They have an oblong shield that covers about a third of their length, as you can see going on there. And the shield, it can form an 80-degree angle and helps protect them. And the futurostome is also just in the midpoint of the mantle, so very much like other types of slugs. And their mucus is actually colorless and iridescent, so that has a little bit of color to them, and not very adhesive, which is quite interesting too. So, not too different in terms of their anatomy of other snails. In terms of their fossil distribution, they have been found to live throughout the European tertiary and quaternary deposits, so they're quite well-rounded. And their indigenous distribution, or where they're native to, they've been sadly introduced around the world, but they are generally considered to be native to Western and Eastern Europe and parts of Northern Africa. And non-indigenous distribution has been places like Mozambique, South Africa, the United States, Canada, Mexico, South American states like Argentina, Chile, Brazil, and Colombia, Asia places like Japan, China, and India, and Oceania, they've been introduced to Australia and New Zealand. So these guys are nocturnal, and they typically feed at night. They're not very active or prolific, but when alarmed, they can draw their head within their shield, but they do not contract their body, and when irritated, they can actually expand their shield. So their homing instinct is also strongly developed in this species, so that means they can ramble around, looking around foraging, and look for particular crevasses or chinks where they find themselves. They also have been shown to be capable of associative learning, specifically classical conditioning. So they're able to kind of learn certain stimuli means good or bad things. So it's a very common thing in animal training. I know a little bit of animal training because I've done a bit of animal training. Classical conditioning is when you get an animal used to something, or Pavlov's dog, how they salivate when they hear the ring of a bell. You get them used to something, and they get that reaction from it. So these guys are able to learn. So if they learn that this particular area has particular sound means food, they'll learn that, and then they'll go find this. Whenever they hear that sound, they'll expect food. And they're capable of that. And they also detect deficiencies in a nutritionally incomplete diet. If their amino and amino acids, methylene is actually experimentally removed from their food, so they can detect that. In terms of the habitat, they could be found pretty much almost anywhere near human habitation, usually like lawns, gardens, cellars, or other damp areas. They're not gregarious, but they definitely do live around like damp areas, things like that. But they also exhibit a dedicated preference for the vicinity of human habitation, so there's lots of water around there. And which is quite interesting. But in Ireland, they don't actually like this. They actually prefer to be in woods and other similar places. And they even been met along the high water mark of the seashore. So similar to other species, they are detritivores, so they clean up dead plants and fungi, and they're also a carnivore, so they'll actually pursue other slugs at a top speed of 15 centimeters or 6 inches a minute, so that's pretty fast. And they're actually considered a major agricultural pest in Florida, like many other things in Florida. So their life cycle is that the eggs of these slugs are typically deposited in a cluster, slightly attached to each other, and they're transparent and slightly yellowish. They get to about 6 to 4.5 millimeters, and they hatch after a month. These tiny slugs will emerge and need at least 2 years to reach sexual maturity, and their lifespan in the wild is about 2 to 3 years. So the mating habits are actually quite unusual among slugs. So they are hermaphrodite slugs. They're usually for hours they'll be circling each other. But after this, the slug will climb into a tree, another high area, then entwine themselves and lure themselves on a thick strand of mucus. Even their white, transparent, translucent mating organs or their penises of their gonopores, which is the openings on the right side of the head, entwine their organs and exchange sperm. So they basically like dangle themselves through a mucus line as they exchange reproductive material, which is really, really interesting. And then both will lay hundreds of eggs afterwards. So that's really, really interesting. Very interesting animals, to say the least. Really, really cool. So anyway, we're going to be moving on to the next animal. So we're moving away from Europe. We're going all the way to Australia. We've got here the red triangle slug, another really cool one. You could probably guess why it has its name, the red triangle slug. Maybe because it has a giant red triangle on its back, which is really, really interesting. Let's see. There we are. There's a perfect one here. Look at you, little friend. So the red triangle slug, or Trypophonus graphite. So these guys are a large air-breathing slug that are from the family Anthracocoridae, which means the leafed vein slugs. So they're quite large. They get up to about 15 centimeters and often striking colors. And they're actually the largest slug native to Australia. And they are a common part of the fauna. And I'll talk about the relative as we get to it soon. So this slug species occurs in the eastern coast of Australia, so from New South Wales down to Queensland, up to Queensland. And there is a pink version, as we'll get into. And it's believed they have potentially introduced into the New Hebrides, but we don't know. So these types of slugs, they tend to live in damp situations and various habitats, including city gardens, forests, woodlands, and heaths. So they're just like damp environments, since they need to keep themselves nice and moist to breathe. So they like to grage on algae, which is interesting. That grows on the surface of smooth barks of some eucalyptus trees on rocks, so they're algae eaters. And sometimes they will enter homes, but they've been known to graze on mold that grows on bathroom walls, so they typically graze on mold. This species also has quite a unusual defense mechanism, so it can secrete a kind of sticky mucus that is actually strong enough to glue down predators for days. And this glue is strongest in wet conditions, but gets less sticky as it dries. So basically, if you try to attack it, it'll put some glue on you, and if you're a small animal, it'll glue you to spot for days. So it's kind of way of saying, hey, don't mess with me, I'll kind of make sure you stay there, you know. Very, very interesting. And the cells responsible for secreting this glue are along the dorsal surface, so about the side there. So about the top and on the side there. And you can see where they get the name leaf-veined slugs, because they look like they've got the veins of a leaf going down them. They're really, really interesting. So they have 2 and not 4 tentacles like other leaf-tailed slugs, so they've only got the 2 there. And they have this indented pattern on their dorsum that resemble a leaf, and they get to about 14 centimeters long. They are quite variable in color. They can be like white, off yellow, yellow dark, or light grey, beige, pink, red, and orange green. And each of these colors form a red, possibly orange magenta triangle on their mantle surrounding the futurostome, or kind of their shell, and a red line at the end of the foot, which is quite interesting, edge of the foot. And the texture is quite smooth. So that's really gets really interesting. As you can see, they've got the red line down there and that triangle on there. But there's a lot of variety, whether they be white or darkish colors and things like that. So juveniles typically lack the red foot border and red triangles in their adults, but they have 3 dark grey stripes running down their dorsal surface of their body. And research has actually been carried out to whether these guys are, some of these different colorations are actually different species or subspecies, but most of the likely they're kind of just variations. Yeah, still cool regardless. Really love these little guys. Definitely little friends. Love these little triangle slugs. So now we're going to talk about their relative. So this is in the same genus. This is a species that actually haven't been named yet. So this is called the Mount Kalapua pink slug. So let's find a nice one in the... Oh, I'll find one on... Yeah, perfect. Look at this little cutie. So these guys are the same genus. They are a Mount Kalapua pink slug, the genus of giant air-breathing land slug. They're in the same genus as the red triangle slugs, so they're a leaf vein slug. Really, really cool. So these guys are only found on Mount Kapur in Australia, and taxonomists have confirmed that they're not conspecific, or they're not the same species as the better known red triangle slug. So they're very likely their own species, but we just haven't named it yet. So these guys can be only found at the top of Mount Kaputa, which is a inland mountain in Namabai in New South Wales in the national park at an altitude at about 1,500 meters, or about 4,900 feet. It's now surrounded by snow gum trees. And this is really interesting. They've been observed to stay within this area, which is estimated to be only 100 square kilometers, so not a big area. And most of this, the top of this mountain is designated wilderness, which is cool. And it's actually believed because this mountain is, even though it's surrounded by dry plains, it does receive rainfall and snow, and there's a temperature about 10 degrees Celsius cooler than the plains. So this kind of makes an island. So this is called a sky island or isolated ecozone. So it's like an island because it's colder. It isolates it from the underlands below. And this is a big issue with climate change as well. As the world warms, that range is going to get smaller and smaller as the world heats up. So it's very likely, and the slugs are going to have to move up and up and up to try and get their optimal habitat. So, and if we warm it up too much, the entire habitat's gone and they're extinct, which is really sad. Because these little sky islands, or at different altitudes where they have the snow and rainfall, actually really important for kind of these little species that like these little microclimates up at the altitudes. And sadly, that already happened. They are considered endangered. About 90% of the total population was thought to have died during the 2019 Australian bushfires, which really sucks. So in life, these guys typically can be seen by the hundreds on cool, misty mornings that are wet. During the day, they tend to hide with plant litter at the base of the trees. And at night, they do come out and climb the tree to eat algae and mossies growing on the tree trunk. So very similar to red triangle slugs. They also climb down the tree early morning to hide and repeat the cycle. And in the ecosystem, they're very important for breaking down, as I mentioned, the nutrients, plant litter into soil to promote plant growth, but also serve as food for birds and other animals. So quite important ecosystem. Description, they're very similar in this red triangle ones, but they're just fluorescent pink. They're just a bright pink, and they're about 20 centimeters or 8 inches in length. They've actually been described just as bright pink as you can imagine how pink they are, so that's very, very bright and pink. In terms of their origin, they are related but not identical to the red triangle slug, and they've been confused why it could potentially, is confirmed as a different species. And the slug has relatives in New Guinea, New Caledonia, New Zealand. We do have leaf slugs here, and Eastern Australia. And these land masses all connected as Gondwana land in prehistory. So probably like late Jurassic, early Cretaceous. And there was actually a volcanic eruption in Mount Katapu about 17 million years ago, back in the early Miocene, that created this high altitude area where these slugs and other invertebrates can live in isolation from a lot of other species in the surrounding rainforests that have vanished due to climate change in Australia drying up. But sadly, climate change could get rid of the habitat again. So a little bit sad, but still really, really cool. So these 4 really wonderful slugs were done by Noah Waller as part of his exhibit slug pack. So I'll obviously put that in the description. Really, really cool. So next up, we got a mod by Monsoon. We've got the vicuña, a very awesome little animal here. We've got the vicuña. Not very little, they're actually quite big. So here's the vicuña. So Llama Vuna. So these are one of the 2 valid species of camelids from South America, the other being the Guanaco. So these guys live in high elevation areas in the Andes, while the Guanaco lives a little bit more lowland areas. So these guys are relatives of the llama, and actually now believed to be the the ancestors of the domestic alpaca, which are raised for their wool. So in terms of their description, these guys are considered definitely more gracile and small than the Guanaco. And another way that they can be told apart is they've got better developed incisor roots. The Guanacos have better developed incisor roots. So these guys also have a long woolly coat that's tawny brown on the back, and while their hair is on the throat is quite long. Their head is slightly shorter than that of the Guanacos, and their ears are slightly longer, so almost like a little bit more cutie, you could say. The head to length of these guys is about 1.45 to 1.60 meters, or about 5 feet. Shoulder height's about 75 to 85 centimeters, or about 3 feet, and they weigh between 35 to 65 kilograms, or just under 150 pounds. And they fall prey to things like the puma and pulipo, which is quite interesting. So in terms of their taxonomy, these guys is considered 2 different subspecies, but I'm not sure how actually accurate they are. But these guys lived in the more extreme elevations of modern times. They're actually present in Patagonia as recently as as much as 3,000 kilometers south of their current range during the late Pleistocene and Eocene, since that was probably more their preferred habitat. And fossils of lowland camels suggest there was a species Llama gracilis, but they have suggested just be vicuñas, actually, which is quite interesting. So in terms of their distribution habitat, they're native to Central Andes in South America. So they can be found in Peru, northwestern Argentina, Bolivia, and northern Chile. And then a small introduced population lives in central Ecuador. So they typically live in elevations between 32,000 to 4,800 meters, or between 10,000 and 15,000 feet. And they feed in the daytime on the grassy plains, but they spend their nights on the slopes. And those areas typically only tough grasses grow, which is interesting. But also the sun rays are able to penetrate the thin atmosphere that creates warm temperatures during the day, however it drops to freezing at night. So their thick but soft coat is actually quite a special adaptation that allows them to trap layers of warm air close to its body, so it can tolerate those freezing temperatures, but also not get too hot during the day, which is quite interesting. So in terms of their behavior, they are similar to that in the guanacos, and they're also very shy animals and can be easily aroused, or kind of not aroused, but like scared off by predators. Due to, among other things, they've got very good hearing. And like guanacos, they like to find salt licks where they find rich of salt. And they can actually drink salt water as well, which is interesting. They're also very clean animals and always deposit their excrement in the same place. And the diet typically consists of low grasses that they eat in clumps. They typically live in family-based groups made up of a male, tend to be about 5 to 15 females, and they're young, and each has their own territory of about 18 kilometers, about 6.9 square miles, but this can fluctuate depending on the availability of food. We'll have a look at the baby as we talk about them. Where's the baby? There's the babies. Little cuties. I love these little guys. So vicuñas typically mate during May to April. After a gestation period of about 11 months, they'll give birth to a single fawn, and that is nursed for about another 10 months. The fawn will then become independent about 12 to 18 months of age, and young males form bachelor groups while the young females will soon for a sorority to join, and this obviously prevents inbreeding and competition. So in terms of their conservation, they are considered least concern, but they were at one point very endangered. So up until 1964, it was unrestricted hunting on these guys, and the numbers were only about 6,000 in the 1960s. As a result, they were declared endangered in 1974, and the state prohibited vicuña wool, but during Peru as well, they kind of protected that and protected them. And to cooperate with the conservation, they signed lots of treaties and things to help protect them, especially as they moved. They also created reserves and breeding centers to breed them. And now the estimated population went from 6,000 to 75,000, which is protected by game wardens. And there is they herd them every year to harvest the wool. But luckily, so that shows they're a great conservation success story. From the 60s, they've gone between 6,000 to 75,000. And in Bolivia, they actually formed a sanctuary that grew the populations like 125,000. And since this was like a cash cow, they kind of later stopped open the training again. And the wool was sold for over $300 a kilo. And then in 2002, and the IUCN actually still supports a lot of action conservation projects to protect the vicuña. And even though they've lowered their status to least concern, so there's lots of conservation projects to make sure that they're doing okay, because these guys are not only very valued for their wool, but they're also quite important big animals for the ecosystem. As I mentioned, they're prey for pumas and things like that. But yeah, people like them for their wool. So vicuña wool is quite popular due to its warmth, and it's used for apparel. It can be used in like socks, sneakers, coats and suits and other accessories, and also home furnishing such as blankets. And its properties come from the tiny scales in its hollow air-filled fibers that interlock and trap insulating air, and actually has some of the finest fibers in the world compared to like cashmere goats and Angola rabbits, which is like 12 millimeters. So it's quite good. So it's really up there with some of the finest wool. So that's part of the reason why they were protected as well, but also because being an endangered species, they deserve it. But luckily, they're quite least concern, great conservation success story, and people really care about them because we like their wool. So yeah, another cool animal. So that was done by Monsoon. Monsoon always does a wonderful job with their mods, especially their herbivores, and I love their mods. Do a great job. So next up, we've got a remaster. So Good Boy, we love Good Boy. Always gives us wonderful touch to things. So remade Leaf's Guanaco. So we get to talk about the Guanaco again, and it looks amazing, absolutely beautiful. So the guanaco is a camelid native to South America as well. So it's the bigger relative of the vicuña and lives in lower elevations. The domestic ancestor of the llama. So these guys typically stand between 1.0 to 0.3 meters, or about 3 feet to 4 feet at the shoulder. It can reach a body length of about 2.1 to 2.2 meters, or about 6 to 7 feet, and weigh between 90 to 140 kilograms, or about 200 to 310 pounds. And their colors actually vary very little compared to domestic llamas, ranging from like a light brown to dark cinnamon with shading of the white underneath. They also have grey faces and small straight ears, and they can live for quite a long time. They have a lifespan of about 20 to 80 years. So guanacos are actually one of the largest terrestrial mammals native to South America today, and other terrestrial megafauna that's kind of in their size includes tapirs, marsh deers, spectacled bears, white-tailed deer, and jaguars. And they have thick skins on their neck, which is actually a trait also found in their domestic counterparts, and this protects their necks from predators' attack. And actually, Bolivians will use this neck skin to make shoes, flattening and pounding the skin to make the soles, and that's quite interesting. And hunting is only allowed in Chile on Tierra del Fuego, where the only population is not classed as endangered. And between 2007 and 2012, about 1,300 guanacos were legally hunted there. So in terms of their diet, these guys are herbivores, grazing on shrubs, grasses, herbs, lichens, flowers, and cacti. And the food is actually swallowed with little chewing after entering the forestomach and then digested through rumination. Progress is quite similar to ruminants, though they're not closely related to them, typical ruminants, which is actually involved in the forestomachs, the glands. They also have a higher blood count, and they have lots of hemoglobin in their skin and their blood as well. So, living at higher altitudes, they're able to survive in low oxygen habitats. And like the fibers of vicuñas, the fibers of guanacos are particularly prized because they're quite warm and soft. And they're valued second only to that of the wool of the vicuña, and their pelts are actually sometimes used for substitute of like red fox as well, because the textures are quite difficult to tell apart. And like their domestic descendants, llamas, they have double-coated coats with coarse guard heads and soft undercoat, which has been compared to cashmere. So in terms of their population and distribution, so these guys inhabit the steppes and scrublands and mountainous regions of South America. They can be found in Peru, Bolivia, China, Chile, and into Patagonia, with a small population in Paraguay. They're most numerous in Argentina, as well as the Tierra del Fuego, where the only places mentioned they're legally hunted. These areas have more robust populations since grazing competition from livestock is limited. They're also responded to forage availability, occupying zones with low intermediate food availability in the breeding season and highest availability in non-breeding season. So estimates of the population between 2016 is about 1.5 to 2 million in animals across their whole range. And this is only 3 to 7% of the guaco population that was actually killed off by, the Spanish conquistadors in South America. So they are considered least concern and doing quite well, but they're only about 7% of what they were, which is a little bit sad. And there's also been a small population actually introduced into the Falkland Islands. That's a population of about 400, I believe. So in terms of their herding structures, these guys live in herds comprised of females, a young and a dominant male. So the bachelor males will form separate herds, and while reproductive groups tend to be small, consisting of more than 10 adults, bachelor herds may actually have up to 50 males. And when feeling threatened, they'll alert their herd and to flee with a high-pitched belting call, and they usually run behind the herd to defend them, so the males will come and defend their herd. And they can run up to 56 kilometers an hour, or about 35 miles per hour, and often on steep and rocky terrain. They're also quite excellent swimmers, and the typical lifespan for a guanaco is 20 to 25 years. So, as well, in terms of their ecology, these guys are diurnal, so they live in small herds of one male and several females. And as I mentioned before, natural predators for these guys include pumas and the culipo or Andean fox. Fox predation was unknown until they found one actually scavenging on like a really weak ones. And the absence of pumas on the Tierra del Fuego was also believed to be a factor and allow the fox to occupy its niche. And finally, this behavior is not new. As the fox is nocturnal, they're able to catch its prey. It's actually quite challenging to observe. Faced with the threat of the red fox, these guys also have strategies to try and protect their young as they circle around the vulnerable, and if they're successful, they chase the fox away, which would be impossible for a puma, actually, as well. And when threatened, they will alert the rest of the herd, as I mentioned, they'll actually often spit like other camels when threatened, and they can spit up to about 6 feet at distance. So the mating season is typically between November to February, which males will often fight quite violently with each other to make these little guys, of course, and they'll establish dominance of breeding rights through that. Typically, once they've mated and impregnated the female, 11 and a half months later, a single Kuligo is born, and then the Kuligos, or baby Guanacos, are pretty much ready to walk immediately after being born, and males are chased off with the herd at about 1 year old to kind of form bachelor herds. So usually the dominant male will chase them away about that age. Also, with domestication, although they're still considered wild, there's about 300 guanacos in US zoos and about 200 in private herds. Guanacos have long been thought to be the parent species of the domesticated llama, which is confirmed by phylogenetic analysis, and actually shows that domestic llamas have actually also have had cross hybridization with alpacas, and which are descended from wild vicuñas, and so there's a little bit of mixing around with all these different guys. But I love the guanacos, and it's so nice to get a nice guanaco. I really love these animals; they're really cool. If I ever got a little bit of a farm, I'll definitely try and get some guanacos, maybe some Taurus cattle as well. I like the more wild form thing. So like it's just sometimes just better looking and more fun to have the wild type, in my opinion. Yeah, really, really cool. So this was done by Leaf and Gaboy. Gaboy kind of gave it a nice big remaster, Leaf's original one, so definitely great job there. Next up, we've got another returning old modder, really, really awesome. We've got Bongo Hardwood. You know how much we love Bongo Hardwood. So Bongo is created this along with Mikey. He's created the Greater Kudu. So let's see if we can find the male here. So this is a Greater Kudu. So these guys are a large woodland antelope found in eastern and southern Africa. So in terms of the physical characteristics, you can see they've got quite a narrow body with long legs, and their coats can be like reddish brown to bluish grey. And they possess, 4 to 12 vertical stripes down their back and along their torso. And their head is also darker in colour to the rest of their body. And you can see bulls also tend to be much larger than the cows and utilising lots of grunts, humming, and graspings. The males also have beards, or the bulls have beards running along their throats, and they also have these quite large horns that if they were to be straightened, even though they're twisted, you can see they're twisted. If they were to be straightened, they could have an average length of about 120 centimeters, or about 47 inches, with the record being 187 centimeters, or about 73 inches. And they divide slightly as they slant back into the head, and then kind of turn twice. These horns actually do not begin to grow until the bull is about 6 to 12 months of age, and they do their first rotation about 2 years, and then their second rotation at about 6 years. And they even sometimes, if they've been live old enough, they'll have 3-4 turns. They're actually also considered one of the largest species of antelope. So bulls weigh between 190 to 270 kilograms, or between 420 and 600 pounds, with a maximum being recorded about 315 pounds, or just under 700 kilograms, or about just under 700 pounds. And they stand at about 160 centimeters tall at the shoulder. Their ears of the greater kudu are also quite large and round, as you can see going on there. We'll have a look at the cows. So the cows are definitely a little bit smaller. These guys are typically, the females are typically about 120 to 210 kilograms, or 260 to 460 pounds, and stand about 100 centimeters, or about 39 inches tall at the shoulder. Their head to body length is between 185 to 245 centimeters, about 6 to 8 feet, though their tail may add another 30 to 55 centimeters, or about 12 to 22 inches. So in terms of that taxonomy, there was formerly 4 subspecies described, but it's been observed there's really only 1 to 3, and it's mainly just based on color morphs. Most of them kind of just lumped them into one, and then they're quite related. They're in the genus Telephagus, which includes the bushbuck, Nyala, as well, Seatunga, Nyala, and Bongo, which is quite interesting. In terms of their ecology, these guys are quite a wide range. We'll look at the male again because he's just so impressive. So the range of the greater kudu extends from Ethiopia, Tanzania to Kenya, south up to Zambia, Mozambique, right into South Africa. Other regions that can be found in the Central African Republic, the Democratic Republic of Congo, Djibouti, Mozambique, Somalia, pretty much all places. They've also been introduced into small numbers in New Mexico, but never released into the wild. Their habitat typically includes mixed scrubbed woodlands, the greater kudu actually being one of the few large mammals that prefer to live in settled areas, like in scrub woodlands and abandoned fields and designated pastures. So they like kind of those more wooded areas. And they also like degraded pastures, moke bush and acacia in lowlands, hills and mountains. And they often will venture into open plains only if there's large abundance of bushes, but normally avoid open areas because they become easy targets for predators. Their diet typically will consist of leaves, grasses, and shoots, but occasionally tubers, roots, and fruits. And they are especially fond of oranges and tangerines, which is quite fun. During the day, kudus normally cease to be active and seek cover under woodland, especially during hot days, and then they'll come out at night or early morning, late afternoon, where they will find water holes and they have roots and bulbs that have high water content. And although they tend to stay in one area, they may move large distances in drought to find water. And in southern Namibia, they actually, where water is relatively scarce, they've actually been known to cover quite large distances in very short periods of time. So these guys are a prey species. They often get preyed upon by lions, spotted hyenas, and African wild dogs. And cheetahs and leopards have been known to prey on cows and calves, but not really known to attack bulls. They've also been preyed upon by crocodiles as well. But when a herd, typically they have a preference, a much more dangerous to kudu than other large ungulates, because these guys prefer dry upper areas compared to wetland areas where crocodiles hang out. So typically it's more mammal predators they're worried about. Typically when a herd is threatened, an adult, usually a female, will usually bark to alert the rest of the herd. And despite being nimble over rocky hills and mountains, they're not fast enough to escape their main predators on open terrain. So they typically rely on leaping over shrubs and small trees to get away from them. So that's why they prefer closed areas. Greater kudus also have excellent hearing and accurate eyesight that allows them to see predators. And the colouring themselves helps break their outline in the woodlands that allows them to hide from predators. So in terms of their behavior and social organization, they have a lifespan of about 7 to 8 years in the wild and live up to 23 in captivity. They may be active 24 hours of the day, but typically like to come out early morning, late afternoon. Herds typically will disperse during the raining season where food is plentiful, and during the dry season they can only be found in a few concentrated areas with food, so the herds can obviously find food. We'll have a look at a female while we're talking about something else, so we just get a nicer look at the other mods. So, greater kudus are not territorial, but they have home ranges instead. Typically, a matriarchal herd or a female herd will have a range of about 4 kilometers squared, but the home ranges can overlap with other maternal herds. And adult males typically have larger ranges to about 11 square kilometers, and generally encompasses the range of 2 to 3 female herds. Females typically live in herds of about 6 to 10 with their offspring, but sometimes can herd up to 20 individuals. Male kudus typically live in small bachelor herds, but more commonly found solitarily. And solitary males will join the females and calves about April, May during the mating season in South Africa, but it changes depending on the range. Typically, male kudus are not always physically aggressive with each other, but they can spar. And between males, typically between ones of the same size, sparring can occur because if they're too evenly matched. Typically what they'll do is they'll interlock their large horns and shove one another, and typically dominance established until one male actually exhibits the lateral display. So he's like, hey, I'm done, I finished. But in rare circumstances, they can actually get entangled in themselves and die because they can't get their horns away from each other. They get locked in, which is quite rare though. But we'll have now talk about the little babies. Where's the little babies? There you are, so cute. So little baby kudu. So kudus typically reach sexual maturity between 1 to 3 years of age. And the mating season occurs during the raining season, where they fluctuate, which can be a little bit different depending on the region and the climate. During mating, the male will kind of strut in front of the female, stands in front of her and does a neck whistle. Then the male will then tail the female with a low pitched call to try and let the female allow him to copulate her. Typically, gestation lasts between 240 days or about 8 months, and calving will typically begin between February and March, where the grass tends to be highest. They tend to bear one calf, but sometimes they will have twins. A pregnant female kudu will leave her group and then give birth, and the newborn will be hidden for about 4 to 5 weeks to avoid predators. But after 4 to 5 weeks, the offspring will accompany their mother for short periods of time, and then by 3 to 4 months of age, they will accompany her at all times. And by the time it is about 6 months old, they are quite independent, and the majority of births, as I mentioned, happen during the mating season or wet season, about January to March. And in terms of maturity, female kudus reach sexual maturity about 15 to 21 months old. So about, a little over 12, 24. So that 3 years, males typically 21 to 24. So typically 2 years. So in terms of human interaction, they have actually both benefited and suffered a lot from human interaction. So it's quite complicated. So humans turning more of their homeland into farmland has actually restricted their range, and destroying woodland cover where what they need as their habitat is a big issue. But also humans create wells and irrigation that allows them to occupy territory that have been too devoid of water for them to survive in. So it's kind of a double-edged sword. Humans both hurt and help them. Another big issue as well is they're a big target for poachers because they're quite big, meaty, and they've also got the huge horns that they'd like to have. And the horns of Great Kudu are used actually to make shofars, which are a Jewish ritual horn blown by Rosh Hamasuz, and they also appear on the Ethereum 50-cent coin. So overall, they are doing okay. I believe they are considered least concern. Yes, they are considered least concern, but they are declining in some areas. So in the northern parts of their range, they have declined quite a bit because of hunting and rapid habitat loss. And they have been evaluated as low risk as a dangerous species. But the long-term survival of the greater kudu is large, not in jeopardy, because there's lots of populations where they're managed. But in the northern parts, they could do with a little bit of help, just some reintroductions and some protections to try and help them since they've been hunted a bit too much. But most of the range are doing okay. So they receive quite good protection in southern Tanzania to South Africa. So southern parts of their range, they're doing quite well. There's also large populations in places like Tanzania, Zambia, Namibia, Botswana, and Zimbabwe, and also in the Kruger. And South Africa, they can be quite good. And also, they're quite abundant on private farms and conservancies within Southern Africa. And also, they are quite popular with trophy hunters, so people like having them around. So as long as there's good regulations in place, especially in the northern areas where they're a little bit more depleted, these guys will be fine. And we'll get more of these beautiful antelopes. So, we've got Bongo Hardwood returning with that really awesome mod. Bongo Hardwood is definitely one of those modders that doesn't mod very often. But when you get one from him, it's a certified banger, and I really love it. And he's also a zookeeper like me as well. He works a lot with ungulates. I'm definitely more of a reptile bird person, but he works a lot with ungulates, and it's really, really awesome that animals that he gets to work with, he gets to put in the game. So it's really cool. So anyway, thank you Narwhal, thank you Monsoon, thank you Leafinger Boy, and thank you Bongo and Mikey for making all these wonderful mods. So yeah, I think this is a great place to end the video. So I really, really, really hope you guys enjoyed this video. Hope you guys like and subscribe. Always look at the little bell icon to get notified with anything. So yeah, if you guys enjoyed this video, hope you guys like and subscribe, and bye-bye.